Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, everybody's here. Okay. Uh, where to begin? I don't know where to begin because uh, I knew that this was probably coming. I didn't know exactly how. There were times in the last few months where basically it was hinted at or intimated that, look, Jack's doing what Jack should be doing now, and Jack's not as involved as he was. And one of the frustrating things over the last couple of years has been that I think there's times where people either because of disbelief or they just maybe somebody had gotten their tendrils into people. People wanted to downplay or diminish just what a big influence Jack Easterby had on a lot of people over there, and it wasn't overstated. Is this like the end all? Is this the end of all Texans problems? No, of course not. I think the fact that Jack Easterby was allowed to have the incredibly big influence and presence that he had is kind of a sign of a problem that existed, and one that I hope is now at least gone or at least being worked on. I think there were people that were close to Cal McNair, Anna McNair, that helped helped them and others in the organization see exactly what Jack Easterby was and exactly how divisive he was. And Andre Johnson put his name on it a long time ago. And Andre Johnson's the guy that didn't have to worry about losing his job, didn't have to worry about Jack Easterby twisting his words some way or something because Andre can take or leave a job in the NFL if he wants, where a lot of other people, like honestly, guys, it sounded like an episode of Survivor or something. A lot of the stories over there about just how people were pit against each other, how there was just paranoia about who and what Jack Easterby was saying or talking to people about. So it was really really weird. I'll start with John McClane's Twitter because I think John's a guy that I could see become like visibly miserable over the last few years. And let me bear with me for a second, guys, just because I know we had like 55 people in the other one um, before I screwed up all the sharing stuff. So I just want to be sure. I'll let you guys share it. This will be just us. Okay, so John McClane. I said before the season I thought this would be Jack Easterby's last with the Texans. Had no idea he'd be fired during the season, as reported by Adam Schefter. There'll be rejoicing throughout the organization. I think that the guys that are still there, the people that are still there, yeah, they like a lot of people are really miserable with what Jack Easterby did and how much Jack Easterby was really good at selling himself on being qualified for a job, but then not being qualified at all for the job, and then digging his little fingers in to everybody's pudding, trying to put his input in when he really didn't have a clue what he was doing, including things like assisting on trades that didn't make any sense at all, or contracts that didn't make any sense at all. Like Jack Easterby was a huge part of that. The organization said it as much when they talked about how he and Bill O'Brien were responsible for retooling the roster in 2019. Uh, John McClane again. Easterby spent too much time leaking Texan stories to his favorites in the media, which earned him a lot of enemies. Then he denied leaking stories to the McNair family. Good riddance. Two parts there. I think that with John, I mean, part of that's kind of inside baseball. You know, maybe McClane being a little pissy about the way that news was dealt with. But look, leaks are a part of the NFL, and usually when there's a leak, more times than not, people know what's going on. The front office leaks it, or an agent leaks it because there's permission, or the front office is trying to accomplish something. And people in the organization are finding out that there was information leaked, and people at the top or in high positions are confused about how the information got leaked. That tends to be an issue, and that starts to be a problem. And I think that's one of the areas where people started to dig into, like, wait, well, why the hell are certain things happening? let's see, John McClane, firing Easterby is one of the best decisions in the history of Houston sports. If the McNair family wants to make another great decision that'll be met with 100% approval, they should bring Andre Johnson back into the organization. He was Easterby's most outspoken critic. When Andre Johnson criticized Easterby publicly, he didn't hide behind anonymous quotes. His criticism was on the record, and that was that Easterby had an explanation for Andre Johnson's criticism, and I think Easterby had lots of explanations for every mistake or every error. And Landry Locker is really good at talking about this because Landry was on site for some of it. The longest conversation I ever had with Easterby was about an hour long on the phone one time, and my biggest belief coming out of that, and I went into the conversation kind of with my guard up. This was before there was the article written in Sports Illustrated, but I'd been suspicious and skeptical of Jack Easterby and what his role was in the organization from the time they hired him, before he was really on anybody else's radar. There were some things that made me very nervous and skeptical about it. So I went into this conversation with him, and I know the type. I've dealt with guys like this before. So but I wanted to be sure, and I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. But there's kind of like items that you can tick off on a list where uh, every 5 minutes or so he paid me a really big compliment and show how we're on the same side in all this. And then he spit out a few of his motivational sayings, just spitting out platitudes. And I could tell that he was kind of one of these guys, like a charismatic snake oil salesman that was going to sell people on his ability to be a servant leader and to affect change and things like that, all the buzzwords. But I think that the big thing for me moving forward is, okay, did they figure out exactly why this happened and how he was taken in by him? Let's see. I heard Landry talk about Jack throwing Cal under the bus and talking bad about him. But what is he referring to? I don't remember that. That was at a meeting that I wasn't at, where that was Jack Easterby had assembled some media members and was having a conversation with them, kind of like a airing of the law, airing of everything, airing of grievances, I suppose, maybe an explanation. And the way Landry explains it, it was a whole lot of, Bill O'Brien did this, and that was Bill O'Brien's decision. When I don't remember exactly Cal's part. You want to listen to Landry and Lopez in their podcast today because I know they're going over it at some point in depth. Um, so I think that Florio earlier said that Easterby might find himself with another team, and people were incredulous about that. I'm going to say I think he's a masterful blame shifter, and I think there's a chance that he ends up explaining to somebody else how those woeful Texans and what a mess they are, and that's why I was point painted out to be the scapegoat, and he ends up being that guy. Okay, so this is the thing about Easterby that I found weird. It was guys would tell me that Easterby was just always there. Like you'd go into a meeting with Bill O'Brien, and Easterby would be sitting there in the corner, writing his little notes and looking. And some guys like him. I think that you got to point that out. I think he was really good at finding people, ingratiating himself to them, you know, doing all those things that led him to getting the positions he's had in the NFL. I think when he was in New England, it was probably his perfect role where he could be a guy that could be like the life coach and the senior camp counselor and then the youth minister and all that kind of stuff. And it was fine. I don't know why the Texans decided that, hey, this guy should also be in charge of and giving input for major organizational decisions. And honestly, I think at best, Jack Easterby maybe could have been used as a consultant, but there's a reason consultants are consultants. A consultant can come in and say, oh, look, this is where I think that you might be able to tweak this or do better in this area. When you leave that guy around to be there 60, 70 hours a week and try to get his finger on the pulse of everything. It just got to be too much. Let's see, typical Texans move. How on earth are we going to replace the VP of everything mid-season? All the best VPs of everything are already taken. Yeah, yeah, that's do you guys remember do you remember how long it took to get an official job title out of what Jack Easterby does? And that was what I would hear from people in the organization was that Easterby would swoop in and have into any given department, he would swoop in, he'd have all kind of recommendations and highfalutin talk about things that had to be changed, and then he would micromanage things about which he had no clue, and he would kind of talk in circles and these vague generalities, but he had the ear of people that mattered, and he created this sense of paranoia from people. And then I think when it came to Bill O'Brien, it was just a disaster between those two. The number of overvalued contracts, the things that didn't make any sense in terms of explaining trades, explaining one of the explanations for the DeAndre Hopkins trade was, that DeAndre just was going to want too much money. That makes sense on one level until you counterbalance that with the fact that they paid Nick Martin like he's a top 5 center in the league. I think he might be a backup somewhere right now. He was out of the league at the beginning of the year. Whitney Merciless would be out of football a year later, paying him a huge contract. The DeAndre Hopkins trade itself, not to mention paying David Johnson $12 million guaranteed on that contract. These are all these kinds of things where when you got a Jack Easterby filling Cal McNair and Bill O'Brien's head with all kinds of fluff about how there are no limits and ask and the universe will deliver, all that kind of nonsense, then this is what you get. Let's see. Joshua Schmidt said it seems like y'all heard a lot more about Jack than what y'all previously disclosed. No, I mean it's all out there. It's really been this is what I did. I got sick of people acting like it was being overblown, and it was also it was also a matter of strategy, from some people that managed to survive all of the upheaval. There's a lot of people in the organization that aren't in the organization anymore that were painted as some kind of character issues, basically because they spoke the truth about Jack Easterby. So the people that were able to bide their time kind of were trying to tamp everything down and say like, look, we this will be figured out and this will be taken care of. And Jack's in his corner, and it's going to be all right. And the way I've been framing that is that he's doing what he should be doing, which is not making decisions. And that's where it's been. As far as a lot of this other stuff, it's all been reported. It's out there. Those Sports Illustrated articles are backed up by things that I've talked to with people in private conversation. I think it just got to the point where people had to either make a decision of, well, I'm either going to be a fan of the team and just have to believe that this is all nonsense, or I'm just not going to think about it at all. But there's really, I mean, Landry's been really open about this. Landry's been talking about a lot, and I think Landry is maybe disclosed some things that he hadn't disclosed earlier. But it was a really weird situation. One of the Sports Illustrated, let's see, here's the bullet points of the Sports Illustrated things because I went back from 2 years ago just to read that. That was the first time things kind of really blew up. Undermining other executives and decision makers, including the head coach who helped him bring him into Houston. Yes, that very much jives with things people have said. The team's holding workouts at the head strength coaches during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's yeah, okay. I don't know. Who knows what was going on during all that. Advocating for a trade of star receiver DeAndre Hopkins soon after arriving in Houston one season before Hopkins was sent to Arizona in a widely planned deal. That jives, I think. And again, the tough thing with trades like that is you can always go back and justify them in hindsight for whatever reason. I think that I always look at the DeAndre Hopkins trade as part of a montage of trades and deals where the value was just way out of whack. if DeAndre Hopkins was a one-off situation, you could compare that to Chandler Jones being traded away for a second round pick out of New England. Chandler Jones had issues. There's probably more to it than met the eye. It might have been the off-field stuff, whatever. It was a bad trade on paper, but it's the Patriots, and generally they've got a reputation of getting pretty good deals, especially when it comes to salary. So it's whatever excuse you want to make for any individual deal, you got to look at the big picture. And there are financial penalties for some of these deals that the Texans are still paying, and that's the kind of stuff that Jack Easterby was supposed to, allay and prevent. Fostering a culture of distrust among staff and players, to the point that only one Texan and two other staffers. Okay, to the point that one Texan and two other staffers believe players were being surveyed outside the building. I don't know. We haven't heard anything more about that. I would say this. I mean, I've always been really careful with that one. I think in the story there was somebody that said something about how he saw black SUVs following him. Look, at any given time, there are multiple NFL players who are convinced that the NFL, their team is following them around, either because of a guilty conscience or maybe because they actually are. I was my early days in the NFL before cell phones were really reliable. We used to my agent used to, right, if I didn't have good cell phone service, would make me leave the building to go call from a non-team phone when I wanted to talk to him because he just flat out didn't trust anybody. So, that was a funny one for me because I feel like an editor on that story maybe would have squashed that part. Let's see. Somebody said Vera had a good question. So Vera said, "How hard is it for media members such as yourself, where you observed and heard things but aren't able to publicly discuss the issues until some other media person starts pointing out the issue?" That's really hard for me because I'm not a reporter, and that's where I try to be careful. Like what I'm just talking about with the suspicions of the team following you. Reporters, the good ones at least, are uh, reporting what they're told by what they think is a reliable source. I think some of the old school guys still want at least two sources on it, but I know that's fallen by the wayside. But I've never felt like I'm trained for that. And I also look, I talk to a lot of people that know that I'm not going to go getting them in trouble, because sometimes you report something and people are pretty sure they know who the source is based on what's being reported. So that part is frustrating. There's certain things that people tell you in confidence that you can't necessarily say. And for me, it was it was extremely frustrating until the point that I realized, okay, something was gonna be done. And there's still things like there's things I know about what went on behind the scenes there that to the earlier comment about some things are being disclosed now that weren't before. There's certain things I'll never say unless a guy calls me up and be like, "Hey, yeah, Seth, go ahead and put my name on that." But I just know there were veteran players who were very, very frustrated with and again, not guys who are typically whiners or complainers or anything like that, but guys that were frustrated with the way things were being done. I'll tell you what, one of the weirder stories I heard about all of this, and I've said this on air before, but was that players would be told not to contact their agents after the team told them they were cut because the team might want to dick around. So this is like telling younger players who might not necessarily have the wherewithal or be smart enough to know what's going on. So I did stuff like that. You'd hear a lot of that. This is the funniest thing. When Jack Easterby first came the GM, after Brian Gaine was fired, and Jack Easterby wasn't the GM yet, but Bill O'Brien was working with Jack Easterby to figure stuff out. There was a part here written in one of the stories that was exactly what I had heard, which was that they couldn't get simple shit done. Like they couldn't get things filed. Guys would sign contracts or it wouldn't get filed until like a month later. It was like administratively a mess because nobody knew what the hell was going on. Like it was just a complete goat bleep. And like that's the stuff that got me concerned about just how are these guys operating under the salary cap when you have all this stuff going on? Like, how are you figuring out the higher level stuff if you can't get the simple things done? Anyway, yeah, my big takeaway was just I have to pick up my child at school. Um, I this you can't think that okay, just because Jack Easterby is gone, then everything is awesome and groovy and we'll be just this organization, I think, ended up hiring Lovie Smith in a very slipshod and random manner, and I hope that it ends up being a happy accident. I hope it just ends up being one of these things that you never even realize that the one you were looking for was right there all the time. It'll be like a cheesy romantic movie, but that that was not all that long ago that that happened. The fact that Jack Easterby ended up having way more influence in an organization than he should have, or that he was qualified to have, is an issue that I hope they're working on. And then I think also just from personal experience, I had multiple people telling me that they thought Jack Easterby was a sociopath. And if it comes down to, if your definition of a sociopath is somebody that will say anything and do anything without any conscience, uh, or a sense of guilt or shame, just to get what he needs and what he wants done, then that seems to match up with other things I've heard about him. Now, look, I've dealt with sociopaths before. The biggest and funniest, I think, it is funny, although it's a very serious problem in organizations, is that afterwards you spend months kind of having these moments where you have to revisit the way you're doing business because you realize, like, oh, wow, we're doing it this way because Jack said this, but now it turns out that when Jack said this, he was probably completely wrong, unqualified, and lying. So we got to change the way we're doing this. And a lot of the assumptions you have for how you're doing business, you've got to reevaluate everything. So I I don't think that Nick Casario knew exactly what Jack Easterby was up to when Nick Casario got here. And I think, like many people who were new to the organization, it was probably revealed to them over time. Um, just just how different just how different the stories they were being told by Jack were from the actual scenario. So it's a good sign, but there's still work to be done. And I appreciate everybody who stayed through all the technical difficulties. I'll try to when I do these more, I'll try to answer more questions from you guys. Um, what do you believe transpired that moved the Texans to make this decision mid-season? That's a really, really good question, and I'm not sure other than it was a bye week and maybe they had to get their ducks in a row, and or maybe there was something. Mike Florio had reported that Easterby has been reaching out to people over the last few weeks. So I don't know if that was because Easterby could read the writing on the wall, or if maybe that precipitated something in the organization where they realized that he was putting feelers out. Who knows? But there'll be glorious stories to come. I just hope that is it going to get better from now on? I hope so, Glitch Prod. And Edgar asks, are Seth and Sean back tomorrow? Yes, yes, we are back tomorrow, and you'll have Sean getting the microphones working properly, and Sean keeping me on track. Awesome. Thanks for joining me on. This is the first Seth Payne Show live stream in which we had both video and audio. Thanks, guys.